application seminar. My name is Christina Thompson-Yates. I work at GemServe, and GemServe is the appointed delivery partner for the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme. So today is all about making sure that anyone considering an application in round 7 has the information they need to apply and the opportunity to ask some questions. So some housekeeping for you. Please keep your microphones and cameras off to limit disruption. And please ask any questions you have in the chat box as well. If we have time, we will have a dedicated Q&A at the end, but we may not have time for that. So the team will be busy answering and typing away to your questions. So please don't hesitate to ask anything. And then just to make you aware, the seminar will be recorded. That will be uploaded to YouTube, and also the slides will be shared with you as well. So I'm joined by a handful of colleagues today from GemServe. So Louise Singleton and Katie Ansari will be doing running through an introduction to the scheme itself, then handing over to Sam Hales to talk about the application process. Then back to Louise, who will be joined by Alison Sanders to talk about the assessment process, and then back to me at the end to talk about the supports available to applicants. And then if we do have time, we'll go through the Q&As. So I will hand over to Louise.
Thank you very much, Christina. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Louise Singleton. I head up the HNES scheme at GemServe. If you go to the next slide. Just to give you a bit of context of where HNES sits in the government's transformation programme. So we're the purple box here. We had a demonstrator scheme that started in 2021 and that had one funding round, and that was used as sort of a test case to understand whether there was sufficient appetite for the scheme, and there was. So in 2023 we launched the main scheme, and that was originally designed to run until 2025 but has since been extended, so we now have funding out to 2028. There are other schemes that are part of the transformation programme. So originally we had the Heat Network Investment Project, which launched in 2018, and that was designed to help fund new heat networks. And that was then replaced by the Green Heat Network Fund, which is still open for applications for people wanting to build new heat networks. But HNES is focused on existing heat networks and improving the performance of those that are already in operation. And then there are other things within the transformation programme, things like the Heat Network Technical Assurance Scheme, or HNTAS, which is part of the market framework, and that's going to be coming forward with key standards that heat networks, both new and existing, will need to meet. So HNES is a really good way of being able to find additional funding to ensure your heat networks are going to be meeting the technical standards that come into force next year. And then we also have heat network zoning that's coming in next year as well, which will put mandation on certain key areas to connect to heat networks. So if we move to the next slide. So there are 3 key aims of HNES. The first is to reduce carbon emissions by making heat networks more efficient. The second one is to reduce customer detriment to improve consumer confidence. So when we moved from the demonstrator to the main scheme, obviously we finished the demonstrator in 2022, and the main scheme didn't start until 2023. And within that time, we obviously had the invasion of Ukraine and the energy crisis. And so within the main scheme, the customer detriment aim has really taken a greater prominence than it did in the demonstrator, to really help address this kind of cost of living crisis, and really help to reduce customer bills and improve consumer confidence. So the government has a target to increase the number of heat networks to 20% heat demand, or 18% heat demand, I think, by 2050. And if people on existing heat networks are not experiencing good outcomes and aren't happy with the service they're getting, we really want people to be having positive, really promoting the fact that heat networks are brilliant and really help to drive that narrative to help us reach that target. If people are having poor experiences, then it can be trickier to roll out heat networks to meet this target. And the third one, as I've just mentioned previously, is around helping the to prepare the heat network market for sector regulation and technical standards. So yeah, helping existing heat networks to improve their efficiency in order to meet the standards that will be coming through things like HNES. So in terms of how much funding is available, so we have revenue grants and capital grants. Revenue grants are designed to help organisations who know that their heat networks aren't performing particularly well, but they don't know why. And so the revenue grants pay for an external third party, so a consultant, to come in and review your existing heat network, understand the issues that are being faced, and make recommendations on how the heat network can be improved. The revenue grants are full funding, so up to £24,000, including that. So between £15,000 and £24,000 is the kind of budget range that we set out for revenue grants, and that is full funding. So there's no requirement for you to put in any funding yourself. And up until this point, we've had £2 million announced across 23-24 and 24-25. But for round 7, within the updated application forms, there will be an ability for revenue projects to apply for funding in 25-26. However, this funding is subject to availability. So we reserve the right to maybe reprofile funding spend depending on what applications we receive in this round. On the capital grant side, this is to support the actual implementation of improvement measures. So physically changing the network to improve its performance. This is part funding, so it's up to but not including 50% of the project costs. So you would be required as a heat network operator to match fund more than 50% of the project. And we have funding up to £75 million available out till financial year 27-28. For round 7 in the application forms, capital projects will be able to apply for funding for this financial year 24-25, next financial year, and then also financial year 26-27. It's worth noting that if you request funding within a particular funding year, it needs to be spent within that funding year, and that includes evidence that the funding has been spent. But your match funding doesn't have to be spent at the same time, so you don't have to do sort of your 50%, 51% match funding at the same time as your grant funding. You could do your match funding up front or your grant funding up front, or a mixture of the two as you go through, as long as at the end of your project the match funding is greater than the grant funding. That's the point at which it all needs to level out, basically. In terms of who can apply, so as I said, it's existing heat networks, so we're not looking at any new builds, and it can be district heating or communal heating systems are both supported. The heat network must be situated in either England or Wales, and we're open to public sector, private sector, third sector, hospitals, universities, charities, a whole range of different organisations. So it's not specifically targeted at any particular sector. And the applicant themselves must be a legal entity who has the authority to sign off investment decisions. So the reason for that is particularly from a capital perspective, you're required to match fund and provide your own funding for the capital measures. So we want to make sure that whoever is responsible for that is aware that this application has been submitted and is prepared to and has that funding available. But equally on the revenue side, despite there not being any match funding, the aim ultimately is that you take the recommendations from the revenue study and implement them to actually achieve the savings. And therefore we want to make sure that people are aware that there may be a requirement to spend some money in the future to implement these measures. So it can't be a consultant, for example, who submits an application on your behalf. It must be the people that have the sign-off decisions who submit the application. In terms of funding rounds, so our next funding round is round 7. That closes on the 26th of July. In order to submit an application, you need to set up a SharePoint space, and that's where you'll upload your application and your supporting evidence into. We ask that you request a SharePoint space no later than a week before the closing date. That just gives us time to set up the SharePoint spaces, gives you time to access them. If there are any issues, we've got time to sort them out. And then you can upload your application there. So the last date for round 7 is the 19th of July. For round 8, there is the closing date for that will be the 8th of November. So the last date to request a SharePoint space will be the 1st of November. And there will be a round 9. We just haven't finalised the exact dates for that round yet. But it's worth noting that there will be further rounds past round 8. So watch out for those dates as and when they are announced. You can join up to our mailing list as well. We'll talk about details later on how to do that. So if you want the latest information, you can sign up to our mailing list for any updates. We have updated the application forms for round 7, so it's worth making sure that you have the latest versions. They will be available from today, so if you do want to have a copy of the new application form, please email us. The email address will be shared later. It's hnes@gemserve.com. And make sure when you're filling in the application form that you have version 7 if you're doing a capital application, or version 5 for a revenue application, and that will be on the first tab. It says at the top which version you have. So please make sure you have the latest version, otherwise we might not be able to assess your application if it's on a previous version. We will also be updating the guidance for applicants document. This we're hoping will be done imminently. However, I'm sure you can appreciate with the election, it's maybe a bit more tricky to get things published through government at the moment. So we're hoping that it will be, like I say, imminently, but there may be a slight delay as a result of the election, but we'll get that out as soon as we can. Okay, so eligibility criteria. So what actually can you apply for under HNES? So on capital grants, so we cover everything from the energy centre through the primary and secondary network and into the tertiary network, and also a degree of metering. There are quite a few things that are eligible, so it's probably easier to say what's ineligible. If you go to the guidance document, it lists out all the things that are eligible. The current version of the guidance document, nothing in the eligibility side of things will be changing in the updated guidance, so it's still valid to look at the existing guidance for this section. In terms of things that are ineligible, any capital costs that you've already incurred before you receive confirmation that you've been awarded funding cannot be included in your grant application. Anything that's not related to the heat network infrastructure, so we can't fund improvements to building fabric, for example, it has to be related to the heat network. Any costs that are relating to engagement activities, so any stakeholder management, any internal project management. So if you already have a staff member that's employed by your organisation, we can't fund their time. For some larger capital grants, there's a requirement to have an external project manager. That kind of resource would be eligible for funding. On the energy centre plant room side specifically, we are not able to replace the primary heat source. We can't fund any replacements for that. So we can do other things within the energy centre. We can change pipe work, we can improve insulation, but we can't replace a boiler, for example, or things like that. It has to, that's not eligible. On the tertiary systems, anything that is related to replacing pipework or heat emitters within the buildings or dwellings. So essentially within a tertiary situation, it's mainly things like system flushing or TRVs, replacement TRVs that we can fund. Anything to do with pipework post the HRU is not eligible. And finally, under metering, any costs that are required under the heat network metering and billing regulations, anything that you have a legal requirement to install, we are not able to fund because it's a legal requirement on you to do that anyway. If you've gone through the process of notifying and you've been deemed exempt, or you've done the cost effectiveness calculations and it's deemed that it's not cost effective for you to install meters, then you would be eligible for metering under HNES. And similarly, if you were looking at going sort of above and beyond the billing regs, for example, sort of putting in additional smart metering or additional sub-metering, then that might be considered as well. If we move on to revenue grants, so essentially the eligible costs are for an optimization study, and we have in the Annex A of our guidance document an outline of what we expect to see from an optimization study, so the different elements that we would expect a consultant to be providing. But in terms of ineligible costs, so again, any work that's already been undertaken before the application, before the contract, the funding has been awarded, wouldn't be eligible. Any internal project management, any internal staffing, again, wouldn't be eligible. And anything relating to construction, operation and maintenance of a heat network wouldn't be eligible either. So some of that would fall under a capital grant. This is solely just about producing this optimization study to give you an idea of what you could do to improve your network. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Katie now to talk through what we expect from a revenue study.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so there's two work packages that are required. Work package 1 is for network operational performance. The aim of this is to investigate and assess the network's current operational performance and the conditions of the network in order to develop a baseline against which the optimization measures can be developed, and the impact that they have, which is quantified in work package 2. This is so that the heat network operator understands the causes of the suboptimal performance and the impact these have on the operation of the network and its customers. There's the steps up on here, which is the data capture, analysis and site visits, and the baselining of network performance and KPIs, and then the analysis of the network performance included in the report. And then I'm just going to go on to work package 2, and this is for the network optimization opportunities. The aim here is to identify and develop the potential optimization measures and to quantify the costs and the impacts of the measures that this could have on the network performance. In this, the heat network operator will receive a report of a robust analysis of the recommendations offered and show a course of action to improve the operational performance and the customer's outcomes. The steps for this one are the development of optimization measures and packages of measures, a rundown of costs and the cost effectiveness of the optimization packages, and the reporting and recommendations. And the final deliverables, which is what's required at the end of the application process. So the final optimization report and the monitoring and reporting. Within this is the project report, the summary site visit report, the techno-economic analysis spreadsheet, and the final submission of the revenue monitoring and reporting worksheet, which includes the optimization study outputs annex. And of course, feel free to complete a capital grant application form. And on to the next one, please. So I'm just going to talk about the HNES funded projects so far. We have funded 200 heat network projects with 32.1 million being awarded to capital and revenue funding, and this was for 41,000 plus residents who have benefited from this. In the sectors that have been funded is the housing associations, local authorities, charities, private sector, health sector, and education sector. And with that, the measures that have been commonly funded is upgrading pipework, improving insulation, updating controls, replacing the HIUs, improving the water quality and reducing leaks. And you can see on the map there the heat networks around the country that have been funded so far. And then I've got some successful projects here. So 33 heat networks have been awarded so far, with 3.2 million awarded in the round 5 projects. 8,500 residents, including students and hospital patients, have benefited from this. And the picture on the top left is for a revenue study for Cambridge Community Housing Development. The top right is capital funding for Lancaster University. The bottom left is capital funding for social housing, communal network and self-funding. And the bottom right is the revenue funding that was awarded to Wellington Barracks in Westminster. There is a link on the bottom there. Feel free to click that to have a read of our other funded projects. As Christina said before, we'll share the slides after the session. Now I'll hand over to Sam to discuss the application process.
Cool, thank you, Katie. So just to sort of run through the application process, obviously we've said new forms are available from today. So if you are looking to put an application, please do email us at hnes.com. Sorry, hnes@gemserve.com to make sure that you get the latest application packs. And basically, I'm going to quickly run through what's in those application packs. So they have a similar structure between both the revenue and the capital packs. So in section A, this is the applicant info. So hopefully a nice easy one for you to answer. So it's all about the organisation who is making the application and any parent companies if relevant, as well as the sort of contact details of anyone who is making the application. Section B is the project info. So this is around sort of the descriptions of the network, as it says. The sort of characteristics of networks, that includes how many residents are on the network, any commercial buildings, connections or customers in need, and the regulatory part. So is it Heat Trust registered? Is it registered under the heat network metering and billing regulations? All those parts. So some basic project information on tab B. And then tab C is project narrative. Most of this is a free text. There's sort of questions with free text. So this is your chance to really go into some detail to explain the project to the assessors, to explain what you want to do and what you want to get out of it. So the more you're able to put into this free text area, and the more detail you're able to give us, the better. It gives the assessors more understanding of your projects, so they don't have to come back as often to ask questions to you. And it also means they're able to hopefully score your application better because they've got greater detail. So as it says there, it's sort of overview of the project and funding requests, overview of the network data availability, how you meet the objectives that Louise set out at the start around reducing carbon emissions and reducing customer detriment, how you're going to disseminate information across like your organization in particular, and anywhere else that would be relevant, and suboptimal outcomes experienced. So moving on to tab D. Tab D has a lot more of the baseline and targets. So these are where we're asking for actual metrics from your network. Obviously, the capital one asks for a bit more than the revenue one, because hopefully, if you're doing capital application, you've got more information and you know what's wrong or what's causing the issues. It's worth saying the more you can complete on this tab, the better for your application. It means that we've got more reliability in the data. However, if you don't have the data, we don't penalise you for not having it. However, we can't score you for having it. So it's better to have it. However, it's not something that means you can't put an application forward if you don't have it. And that you can have estimated or accurate. You can select between those two for the different measures. So there's the different baselines. So sort of network, fuel, the energy generated, the losses, economic indicators, outages and interruptions, for example, on that page. Moving on to tab E is around your funding and procurement. So this is where you're telling us how much you'd like funding wise. And then for capital applications in particular, we ask you to break down the costs across different areas in your network so we can see how much is being applied for in each area of the network. And this helps us just make sure that it looks, the numbers look about right for what we'd expect on a capital application. And then finally, moving on to tab F is the confirmations. This is around confirming that you're uploading the supporting evidence, which we'll move on to sort of outline next what that is, and then sort of various declarations as well. So moving on to the supporting evidence, what I'll do is I'll go through the revenue grant one first because that applies to both, and then I'll build on that on the capital one afterwards. So for revenue, which as I say, all of these apply across to capital as well, we need evidence of the costs, so quotes for the works, quantities, fares, things, anything like that, that gives us the more the firm the cost can be, and therefore the justification for your grant ask, the better. A signed letters or letters confirming, and then it runs through a few things that we need. So applicant support for the application and work to be supported, match funding if relevant for revenue grants, and obviously capital, you will have match funding, so we need that confirmed. Acceptance of the M&R requirements. So there are monitoring and reporting requirements. We'll sort of run through a bit of that later, but it's also all set out in the guidance of, for revenue and capital, what sort of monitoring and reporting you need to do and when. And finally, confirmation of any other subsidies relevant to the project. So again, just getting this because obviously you can't have double funding for the same thing. So you just need to confirm that there isn't that going on. And then an outline of the project program needs to be submitted, as well as a completed AP1A form. So this form is one that is in our application pack. So when you request a pack, we will send it out and we will have a blank copy in there. And this is hopefully a quite nice, easy form to complete. It is basically just asking for your organisation's bank details and organisation size. So that's what we need for revenue. For capital, we need all of that, plus evidence of the targeted benefits. So these are your baseline figures that you've given us, and evidence of how you're projecting the targets, and also as it says there, confirmation evidence around eligibility of metering costs if you are going for any metering costs relative to the heat network metering and billing regulation requirements. So as we've said before, but worth highlighting again, is if you have any metering applications, you can put those in. However, if they are required for legal reasons under the regulations, they cannot be funded. So moving on to the next slide. Something that's quite important is multiple projects under HNES. We want the funding to go as far as possible, and we don't want just one organisation to have, the majority of the funding. We want it to go as far as possible. And therefore, there's a few bits that we just outlined here. And again, it's in the guidance. But for revenue applications, if you're submitting multiple applications in the same funding round, part of the application and part of your supporting evidence, it'd be really good to justify why you need multiple studies, how the networks are different, what sort of different suboptimal performance indicators that you're targeting, and why the learnings can't be shared from one to other ones. So this isn't stopping you from putting more in. If you've got justified reasons for wanting more than one, you're more than welcome to put more than one application in, but we would want to see the justification. If you don't provide this, we will be coming back with clarification questions to request this. So it's a lot easier to put it in as supporting evidence up front. And then if you've already had a revenue grant and you've already been awarded funding and you've put in another application, we would like you to explain why you need another one, and again, why it can't be applied. The learnings from the other one can't be applied. So same principle as above, but we're asking why that one that you've already had funding for can't be shared across different networks. For capital grants, again, there should be consideration given if you're putting 2 in for the same round, as to whether the capital works are similar in nature and if lessons learned could improve efficiencies running them sequentially rather than in parallel. And then if you've already had one capital grant and you're putting in another one, what we'd like to see is you explaining how the lessons learned from your previous project has been incorporated into your new application. And again, it's just giving that a little bit more detail. So it's not stopping you putting in multiple applications, but we'd just like to see that extra detail as part of it. So moving on to the next slide. To submit an application, as I've said, please email us at hnes@gemserve.com. You can request on that email address application forms. So the current versions as of today are version 7 of the capital and version 5 of the revenue. So please do email us, please request those packs. We will send them out to you. And again, we'll let the mailing list know that there's new application forms and to email us. These unlock some of those extra funding years that Louise was talking about earlier. If you are looking to apply, however, maybe aren't applying in the next round, please do express an interest in whichever future round you'd like to apply in. This helps us make sure we reach out to you if we've got new application forms or things change, we're able to reach out to you and let you know. It also helps us understand how popular the scheme will be in the future, and therefore helps us understand sort of the funding going forwards. And then, as we've previously said, please do request SharePoint spaces for your application before the deadline of the 17th of July. As we said, a week before, we want these in a week before the deadline to submit, because that gives time to set them up and you to check you can get access and gives you time to upload. Obviously, we can send you the packs. However, we need additional information to set the SharePoint up, like who would like access, things like that. So again, we will try and clarify that when you ask for an application pack. Please do let us know, otherwise we won't be able to set you a space up. So moving on to the sort of assessment process, going to pass back to Louise and Alison.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, so I want to talk you through quickly now how we actually assess applications that we receive. So I'll start with the capital applications. There are 5 scoring criteria, so 2 on this slide, 3 on the next slide. The first one relates to deliverability. So we look at the costs that you've provided in your application form, the supporting evidence that you have behind those. So have you got quotes, for example, from organisations, so that we can be more confident that the costs you've provided are actually going to be what materialises when you actually deliver the project. We also look at delivery certainty. So we ask in the application form, when do you expect to be able to complete your application by, your project by, and we ask for a project plan or a program of works to demonstrate how you've arrived at those dates, and we look at whether or not we think those are reasonable and achievable. The second part is looking at network performance improvement. So what are you actually hoping to achieve from implementing your proposed measures? So will there be a reduction in costs to the operator of delivering heat to the end customer? Will there be a reduction of the heat tariff to the end customer? How much will the network efficiency improve? How much will your heat losses reduce? Do you currently have a high level of unplanned outages or interruptions, and will these measures address that and reduce the number of outages that you experience? Will you save any gas and electricity? through your measures. It's worth noting, typically people see the gas and electricity savings as just being kind of primary savings. So if you have a gas boiler, for example, or you're operating on a heat pump, but it's worth noting that if you're applying for things like improvements to pumps or replacement pumps, that there may be additional electricity savings from improving the performance of the pumps. So it's worth including those savings as well, the sort of more, I guess, indirect savings that you might achieve as well. So it's worth considering those additional savings. And we also look at the quality of supporting information. So you are asked what is your baseline at the moment and what are your targets, but we're interested in understanding how you've arrived at those targets. What's the calculations that have been done? What's the data that's been used to achieve those? Because we want to understand in reality how, obviously, things are always a little bit hypothetical in terms of projects don't always necessarily run as expected, but we want to make sure that you're able to achieve as close as possible to the benefits that you've put in your application form. So we want to understand what's the calculations or the process that you've gone through to arrive at your target figures, and do we think that those are realistic and achievable? So the other three criteria are project narrative. So this is tab C on the application form, and this is basically where you get to inform us how your project aligns with our objectives. So as I mentioned at the beginning, objective 1 relates to carbon savings, and objective 2 relates to reducing customer detriment. So how does your project align with our aims? And then the third part is approach to disseminating information. So we want to understand if, first of all, how are you going to be, if you have residents or customers, how are you going to be communicating with them about the work that's going to be undertaken and the benefits and the outcomes that they will be able to see as a result of the works? If you have a portfolio of heat networks, how are you going to share any learnings or information from this project with maybe other similar networks in your portfolio? And thirdly, how will you disseminate information and learning to the wider market? So a requirement for all projects is to complete a case study document, but would you be prepared to speak at events, for example, or are you part of a wider group of local heat network operators where you can share this information? Because from our perspective, we want to make sure that the funding we're providing is having as great a reach as possible to improving as many heat networks as possible. The fourth one is value for money. So we look at the costs that you're asking for and how much carbon you're looking to abate, how much gas you're looking to save, and how much electricity you're looking to save. And we do calculations based on, like I say, how much funding you're asking for against how much you're expecting to reduce your gas savings or your electricity savings or your carbon, and we score based on that. And then finally, we have data availability and baselining. So again, what data do you have available? Is it metered? How is it metered? Is it a monthly meter reading? Is it half-hourly meter readings? Do you have a good BMS system in place, for example? What's the level of data that you have available to you to be able to monitor your network and understand the improvements that have been made? So that's on the capital applications. On the revenue application, so we just have the three criteria for revenue. So again, project narrative, how do you align with our objectives and how are you going to disseminate the information that you've received from your optimization study and help to share that learning? On deliverability, again, cost certainty and delivery certainty. So again, ideally, we're looking for quotes from consultants, for example. We're looking for a project plan for undertaking your study. And then finally, data availability and baselining. Now, we appreciate that for revenue applications, partly the reason why someone might want to undertake a revenue application is because they don't have data available to them. As part of that budget that I mentioned earlier, so up to £24,000, it is possible to include temporary metering in that cost. If you don't have metering available, to actually allow the consultants to gather a baseline and then make recommendations. So we're not necessarily If you don't have good data availability, it doesn't mean you're not eligible and you can't be funded. We just want to understand how much data do you have available, and what's going to be the basis for your optimization study, basically. So yeah, so that's the 3 criteria for revenue applications. And now I'm going to hand over to Alison.
Thank you. This slide gives an overview of the likely timescales for the Round 7 assessment process and when you are likely to be notified whether your application is successful. Please be aware that the dates are indicative only and may be subject to change. So you'll submit your applications by the 26th of July, that's the deadline for submitting your applications. And then from weeks 1 to 9, so from the 29th of July to the 27th of September, this is the application assessment period. During this period, applications are checked and assessed and clarifications questions are raised with applicants. So any further detail that's required, you will have questions raised and we'll send those to you, and you'll then provide additional information. There's some more information about clarifications on the next slide. Once the assessment process has been completed, the assessment outcomes are then submitted to the HNES Investment Committee for review. The Investment Committee reviews the project assessments in weeks 10 to 13, and during this review stage, the committee can also raise additional clarifications that applications will need to respond to. The Investment Committee then makes decisions on which projects to recommend for funding. The funding recommendations are then sent to DESNZ for approval, and this typically takes place in week 14 of the process. Once government approval has been given, in week 15, applicants are notified whether their application is successful or not. So according to current estimates, you're likely to find out whether your application is successful around the first week in November. In the case of non-local authority applicants, the grant funding agreement is then issued in week 15 for you to sign. And for local authority applicants, they're required to undergo an additional Section 31 approvals process, and the Memorandum of Understanding is then issued for them to sign. And this process usually takes place in weeks 15 to 19. So moving on to the clarification slide. As we saw in the previous slide, clarification questions are raised by the assessors during the assessment period, and applicants need to provide responses to these. Typically, clarifications are issued in weeks 1, 3, and 5, and it's essential that the applicants are available in these weeks to ensure that full and timely responses can be provided to any clarifications. The Investment Committee may also raise clarifications asking for further information from applicants, and this typically takes place in week 11. However, it's important to note that clarifications could be issued at any time during the assessment process. So that means any time from weeks 1 to 13, and the deadline for responses is often quite short. So this means that it's important to make sure someone is available throughout the assessment period. So if the person responsible for the application is on leave or unavailable for any reason, other colleagues have been briefed and are able to respond. Moving on to the monitoring and reporting slide. This slide provides a brief overview of the monitoring and reporting requirements for funded projects. If your project is funded, you'll be required to submit monthly monitoring and reporting returns as a condition of the grant funding. Monitoring returns are essential for monitoring project progress and tracking when the grant funding will be spent and ensuring that the aims of the scheme are being met. Additional written guidance about the monitoring and reporting process will be provided to successful projects. The application pack also contains a blank template of the monitoring form, so please have a look at this to ensure you are able to provide all the necessary information if your project is successful. There are different forms for revenue and capital projects. The revenue projects are required to submit returns monthly from when the grant is awarded until the optimisation study is signed off. The information you'll need to provide includes updates on how the project is progressing, any risks and issues affecting the project, and budget drawdowns, so when you expect to put in your grant claims. The form also has a sheet that is filled in on the final monitoring return by your consultant once the optimisation study has been completed, and this is to show the outputs from the optimisation study. Capital projects are also required to submit monthly monitoring returns from when the grant is awarded. And monthly returns are similar to the revenue returns, so you'll need to provide project updates, outline any risks and issues, and show when you expect to draw down the grant. And it also covers the match funding element of your funding, and you will need to provide a spend profile for the match funding as well over the course of the project. Each quarter, capital projects also need to fill in the data sheet on tab C of the monitoring return. This covers the previous 3 months, so it's essentially for every month of the year, and it is used to measure the benefits and KPIs of the project. Capital projects no longer need to submit monthly returns once the works are complete. However, the quarterly data sheet covering the previous 3 months needs to be completed for 24 months after project completion. We advise capital and revenue applicants to look at the monitoring returns at an early stage to make sure they're familiar with the reporting requirements and that they're able to provide the necessary data. For example, on the quarterly returns, capital projects will need to provide monthly updates to the technical and economic data provided on tab D of the application form. So it's important to ensure the person filling in the monitoring returns knows how this data was arrived at and has access to all the information. Moving on to grant claims. This slide looks at grant claims and the process that's slightly different for local authorities and non-local authority projects. For non-local authority projects, grant funding can only be claimed retrospectively. So evidence of spend needs to be provided before the grant claim can be paid. And this needs to include invoices from contractors and remittance evidence to show the invoices have been paid. You will also need to fill in the grant claim form and provide evidence of any match funding spend if that's relevant for your project. Local authorities can claim the grant funding up front once the Memorandum of Understanding has been signed. Funding is then released on a financial year basis. So funding is split over 2 different financial years. Evidence needs to be provided to show that the grant has been spent before any grant can be claimed for the next financial year. So local authorities also need to provide evidence of spend at the end of the project or by the end of the project. And the Memorandum of Understanding includes provisions to claw back any funding that isn't used in line with the funding award. So handing over now to Christina, who's going to talk to you about pre-application support.
Thank you, Alison. Oh, now it comes to my slide, I can't share it. Okay, so so as a prospective applicant, you can access front-end support from the team. So that's to discuss the application process and to get started to prepare your application for submission. So as a summary of what the team can provide in terms of support, so we're here for that initial contact and can issue the application form to you. You can have a dedicated one-to-one with a relationship manager, and I'll share the next slide and you'll see some faces that you can familiarise yourself with to discuss your application. We can offer a first pass review of your application to provide you with feedback and can respond to your inquiries prior to submission and signpost when we believe you are ready to submit. So the email address is on the screen there to discuss your project in more detail with one of our relationship managers. So I don't know if, Sam, you can just type that in the chat so people have that to hand as well. But it will be on the slides when these are shared. So here's a summary of where you can find the help and support. So for general inquiries, so if you're not wanting to discuss your particular project, but you just want to ask a general question about the scheme or the application process, or to get the application form and SharePoint spaces, the email address is hnes@gemserve.com. We've also got HNES guidance published for applicants as well. I think Louisa just shared that in the chat, thank you. And we also have a mailing list. So if you're not signed up to that already, please contact us and let us know you'd like to be on it, and that will make sure that you get the latest information and updates about the scheme. There's also HNES's optimization guide, and they've got some heat network optimization guidance videos too for helpful tips on how to improve your network. And then at the bottom there, you'll see some of the faces that you can see today and some more as well. So that's who you can expect to be in touch with. Please also do follow us on social media. So we're on LinkedIn and X, previously Twitter. And yeah, just once again, if you're not on our mailing list already, please do email us so that you can be added. So I know that the team's been busy answering questions in the chat, and we do actually have some time. So I don't know if there's any questions that haven't been answered just yet. Or if anyone's got any more, you are welcome to unmute and ask a question too.
Yeah, I think most in the chat have been answered. I've seen there's one that's just come through from Gareth, so I'll get to that one in a minute. But yeah, just if anyone has any questions they want to ask verbally, then shout now, otherwise I'll go to Gareth's question. Also, I don't know if other people have been able to see the questions that have been coming through. Some have come through in the chat, some have come through in the Q&A. So if you want to see what other people have asked and the responses that we've got, then please have a look at those as well, because that might be useful. And when we share the slides, we'll also share a readout of the Q&A questions, so you can see those as well. Okay, we've had another question through from David. So I'll start with Gareth's one first, which is how long does the first pass review take? So I'd say, to be on the safe side, maybe a week, depending, but it obviously depends on how many other people are asking for application reviews, and how obviously as we get closer towards the deadline, it can get busier. So I'd say maximum a week, but it should be quicker than that. But it just depends on, like I say, how many other people are asking for the same thing. In terms of David's question, do we have any idea about round 8 announcements or Labour's thinking? So from our understanding, there are no major, or we're not expecting any major impacts from the election on the scheme. The only real impact that we've had, like I say, apart from potentially being able to publish our guidance as quickly as we would like to, is the current projects that are funding in round 6. The outcomes of those have been delayed slightly as we need to still go through the internal DESNZ approvals. So that's been slightly delayed, but we don't have any, we don't expect to have any, the election to have any impact on round 7 or round 8 at this stage. In terms of Labour's thinking, there's always been cross-party support for heat networks. I think actually looking at the manifestos, I think most of them are all pretty quiet on heat networks in general. They're focusing on other things, more like things like retrofit. But from our understanding, we don't believe there'll be any impact on our scheme as a result of the election. Okay, another question from Xiaofang. Hello. Will the financial model be required as evidence as part of the capital funding application? So we don't have a similar thing. If anyone's gone through the Green Heat Network Fund process, GHNF, we don't have a requirement of a financial model in that same way. But we would like to understand how the calculations that you've done behind the scenes to come up with your costings and your targeted savings. So any information that you can provide that supports that. So again, like I say, any costings that you've done, or any quotes that you've received, any financial modelling that is of relevance or of helps to support your capital application, then we would happily accept. But it's not necessarily specifically required in the same way that it is in GHNF. But yeah, if you think it supports your capital application, then yeah, please submit things like that. Just checking to see if there's any more questions. I think, yeah, the last one in the Q&A seems to have been answered, so I think that's okay. Anyone else got any other questions? like I say, if you do want to submit in round 7 and you haven't let us know yet, please email hnes@gemserve.com and we'll ask you to provide some further information about your project. So for example, is it a capital or revenue project? Roughly how much grant funding are you looking for? The name of the project, who's the operator, things like that. Just so that we can then keep a track of who's interested in round 7, and we'll ask for who needs access to the SharePoint spaces so we can set those up, like I say, typically the week before the deadline. So yeah, unless anyone has any further questions, Christina, I think we're probably good to end it there.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Hope you found it useful, and we'll share the slides with you as soon as we can.